Hey there.
Hey,
How are you?
good, good. Very tired, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Long day.
What's that?
You had a long week, long day.
Just long day.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. Work at a law firm, so we do a lot of things.
Oh, are you like a paralegal or something?
I guess a legal assistant. Um, we just had meetings after meetings, and I interpret a lot, as well as follow up with cases and make sure everything is settled. But yeah, yeah. Let's see. I have an hour today,
Sure.
so I what I wanted to do today is it possible for you? I was trying to do one of these car sections, and this one for me was maybe slightly more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for you to show me how you do one?
Sure.
Um, and then I'll kind of see if I also use the recording to kind of use it as a guideline too.
Mhm.
I know we have the other one as a guideline, but that one's a bit slower, and I would like to get to a pace where someone like yourself is.
Okay, we could do that.
Yeah, let's see. Screen share. Think Are you able to see the screen that with the Jack Weston stuff?
I see the an AMC passage.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
All right, let's see if you can scroll a little bit below. Let's just see if we can get the entire, well, I guess not. So it's okay. So you can bring it back.
What I do. There it is. Let's see if I can do this
Oh yeah, you
maybe.
probably could maximize.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, perfect. So,
yeah.
okay. So how do you want me to do this? Like not
Well,
having
like just approach it as you would. I've tried doing the highlighting thing here.
Yep.
You showed me, but I can definitely just go ahead and nope, not that one.
Okay. All right, so I guess I'll read it and I'll tell you what I'm thinking out loud.
Okay.
Did that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, all right, in the first place, and anytime they say a number like that, like the first place, second place, or there's three reasons for this, or something like that, you want to be aware of what that first thing is, the second thing is, the third thing is. So right away we say in the first place, um, to make the poem or the novel the central concern of literary criticism has appeared to mean cutting it loose from its author. I'll pause there. So we're saying here that in literary criticism, if you want to make the piece of literature, whether it's a poem or a novel, if you want to make that the central concern, you need to sever it from its author. Okay.
Hmm.
So let me do some highlighting here. So first, to make whatever the poem or novel the central concern, cutting it loose from its author. I guess literary criticism. Okay, and from the author's particular hopes, fears, interests, conflicts, etc. A criticism so limited may seem bloodless and hollow. So, so that if you're trying to if you're trying to cut the piece of literature, like the work itself, away or off from its author, um, it could be limiting and bloodless and hollow, like not really good. So for paragraph one, I would say that I'll use, since it's as the first place, I'll just put like a one parentheses to make literary work central in lit crit, cut it from author. This may seem bad, I guess. So I wrote, yeah, number one, to make the literary work central in literary criticism, you should cut it away from its author, and that this might seem bad, like limited, etc. All right, and then next paragraph in the second place, so yep, number two, to emphasize the work seems to involve severing it from those who actually read it. So I'll pause there. So first paragraph, the first thing, separating the work from the author. Second paragraph, second thing, separating the work from the people who read it. Right? So the audience. Okay. And this severance may seem drastic and therefore disastrous. So this might seem bad. Just like paragraph one, like this might seem bad. After all, literature is written to be read. So what I would put is a number two with the parentheses, cut from audience / reader, I guess, may seem bad. So similar type of things here. Okay. And so far these are just some approaches, it seems, to literary criticism, and that they might not be the best, but we don't know anything about what the author feels yet. So moving forward, the formalist critic, anytime you see a new term, you want to be able to use however they define that term. So a formalist critic is a new term here, and likely the author will elaborate on what that means, but we don't want to put in our own thoughts about what that might mean. So the formalist critic knows as well as anyone that poems and plays and novels are written as expressions of particular personalities and are written from all sorts of motives, for money, from a desire to express oneself, for the sake of a cause, etc. So okay, we're saying that this formalist critic, which we don't know what that is really yet, knows or is aware that literary works could be written as expressions of the people who wrote it. So it's kind of telling you that the formalist critic acknowledges that the author plays a role in this. So maybe I'll say like written expressions of personalities. It's really just kind of telling me that, or it's what we would expect in this third paragraph would be, I guess, how the author, or maybe not that, but something that will I guess, something that would comment on the first two paragraphs, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, formalist critic knows that novels, literary works are written as expressions from that author, so it's acknowledging the argument in the first paragraph. Moreover, the formalist critic knows as well as anyone that literary works are merely potential until they are read. So now it's addressing the argument in paragraph 2, which is about the reader. Okay, that is that they are recreated in the minds of actual readers who vary enormously in their capabilities their interests, their prejudices, their ideas. So this is separating, or this is what's the importance of the reader to a literary work. So okay, and then we have our contrast word, but, and that just means whatever comes before will be different from whatever comes after. So if so far we've been saying, okay, the formalist critic acknowledges the argument in paragraph 1, which is the author, like connecting the work to the author, and it's also acknowledging the argument in paragraph 2, which is the work and the reader. So we're being told that they acknowledge that. But contrast word, what the formalist critic is concerned primarily with the work itself. So formalist critic, work itself. So now we have a better idea of what that means, what a formalist critic means. And so far, it's someone who is predominantly focused on the work itself. And then, we'll see elaboration on that. So after that, oh, and then also anytime I read like an argument in my head, I'm thinking as if I'm talking to the author, and I'm thinking, what do you mean by that? As if I'm asking the author that. So like if we're saying formalist critic is concerned with the work itself, I'm asking, what do you mean by that? And then we should see some elaboration. So speculation on the mental processes of the author takes the critic away from the work and into biography and psychology. So if you focus too much on the author, you move away from the work and you go into these other academic disciplines like biography and psychology, right? Such studies, meaning the ones that are immediately previous, biography and psychology, describe the process of composition, not the structure of the thing composed. Okay, so now we have a couple of things happening. Well, most of the third paragraph is just telling us that the formalist critic acknowledges argument 1 in paragraph 1 and argument in paragraph 2, but we're more concerned with the thing after the contrast word. So I can say paragraph 3, let's see, acknowledges the previous paragraphs, but formalist critic FC concerned with work itself. If you focus or too much focus on author turns into biography, psychology, not what you want, which is literary criticism, which appears to be, oh, I should say, so arrow to the above to tell us that, or to say that the author is acknowledging those two arguments, but the formalist critic is concerned with the work itself. If you place too much focus on the author, you go into these other realms of biography and psychology, which describe the process of composition, but not the structure of the thing composed. And if we're being told that the formalist critic is concerned with the work itself and not on those other things, then we can say that the formalist critic is focused on the structure, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, moving forward. On the other hand, exploration of the various readings which the work has received also takes the critic away from the work into psychology and the history of taste. So when I was finishing up the third paragraph, where they talk about the author, again, I'm thinking about that's acknowledging or saying something about the first paragraph. So I'm going to expect them to say something about the second paragraph or the argument in the second paragraph, which is about the reader. So we know that the formalist critic is not to focus on the author because that goes into biography and psychology. And now in the fourth paragraph, we're going to address the reader. So if you look at the different readings of a work, you again go away from the work. So I'll say readings away from the work and into psychology and the history of taste. So that's if you focus too much on the readings or the reader, you go away from literary criticism and away from the work itself into these other like academic disciplines. So that just acknowledged that second paragraph's argument. We then have contrast word again, but such work, when they say such work, they're referring to psychology and history of taste, right? Just like prior to that, it was such studies.
Mhm.
So, okay, such work, but such work, valuable and necessary as it may be, is to be distinguished from the criticism of the work itself. So, authors acknowledging, yeah, it could be valuable, right? Or necessary to learn about those things like psychology and history of taste. But that stuff is separate from criticism of the work itself. So we're really talking about literary criticism, at least in terms of this type of formalist critic, and it's someone who's not going to do is not going to focus too much on the author or the reader. So okay, the formalist critic makes two assumptions. So again, they're giving us a number two. So we want to be aware what's the first assumption, what's the second assumption. So and they make it nice for us with like the number one. So number one, um that the relevant part of the author's intention is what the author actually put into the work. That is, the critic assumes that the author's intention as realized in italics is the intention in quotes that counts. Okay. Now this could be a little confusing here. But at the very least, we know that this is something that the formalist critic does. And it's really so and what the formalist critic does is that when you analyze a piece of work, the only relevant part of the author's intention is what's there in the work itself. That's the intention that counts. So we are still focused on the work itself, right? So yeah, so for this I can say so number one, um author's intention is what's actually put into the work. So like what I take from that is really like, okay, let's say that the author of some book has this bad guy lose or something, right? But let's say that I'm trying to think of like maybe like a Marvel like example or something, but like but but like let's say that like you have an anti-hero that, or let's say you have a villain that you think is the villain and you're the author, but the villain doesn't really seem like a villain in the actual work. In the actual work, the villain seems like a good guy. So a formalist critic is not concerned with the intentions that might be behind something, but what intention you see in the work itself. If that kind of
Right.
makes sense. So, you know, yeah. So, yeah, that's what I take from that. But it's written in a way that's kind of hard to understand. And if you didn't understand it on the test or whatever, like don't like keep rereading, like kind of just let it like pass and continue moving on, and it might make sense as you continue. But yeah, moving on. And number two, the formalist critic assumes an ideal reader that is, instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings, the critic attempts to find a central point of reference from which to focus on the structure of the poem or novel. So this is also kind of confusing, but the varying spectrum of possible readings, like let's say you have a book and you are focusing on the, so also I should say the first assumption is also acknowledging and addressing that first paragraph argument of the author, right? And now the second thing that they're saying is relevant to the second argument in the second paragraph of the reader. So let's say you have a book and you have a bunch of readers' interpretations of that book that could be different, right? They could all have different perspectives on what they believe the interpretation of a book is. The formalist critic does not take that varying spectrum of all those possible readings, but tries to create this ideal reader, which is some central point of reference to focus on the structure of the work itself. So for this, I would say in our map thing, we can say, let's see. Oh yeah. So I would put an arrow to the above to say that focus on reading or on reader takes you to psych and history of taste away from the work. And then the formalist critic does two things. Author's intention at face value. I think that's a good way of putting it. And ideal reader central, well, rather than varying spectrum of readings. So in this paragraph 4 here, we have an arrow to the above to say also that if you focus too much on the reader, you go into these other realms of psychology and the history of taste. And the formalist critic is really focused on the author's intention at face value and on this ideal reader, which is not the varying spectrum of various readings from different individuals. We still don't know necessarily what that ideal reader is, but we know it's not, just all these like people's takes on stuff, right? So, okay, next paragraph. There is no ideal reader, of course, okay? But, contrast word, for the purpose of focusing on a poem rather than on the critic's own reactions, it is a defensible strategy, that of the ideal reader. So author is acknowledging here that in reality, there's no such thing as an ideal reader. But if we are to focus on the work itself as a formalist critic would do, it's still a pretty good strategy to use this concept of an ideal reader. Then we have in parentheses the alternatives are desperate, those alternatives are alternatives to the ideal reader. So if the ideal reader is not, if the ideal reader doesn't exist, it's okay because we can still use the concept of an ideal reader to focus on that work as a formalist critic would want to do. And the other alternatives are not as good. They're desperate. So either we say that one person's reading is as good as another's, and if that's the case, there's no possibility of a standard reading, right? Like if someone takes away from a movie or something, I don't know, like let's say like Wolverine or something. Some people watch some Wolverine movie or something, and he's I don't know if like this would even fit, um but let's say that some people think he's a good guy, some people think he's a bad guy. If you treat each of those interpretations equally, there's no way for us to have a standard interpretation because
All
we're
right.
seeing that the people who say that he's a bad guy are just as right as the people who say that he's a good guy.
Mhm.
That means that we can't have a standard reading, right? So that's an alternative, and that's why and that's a desperate alternative. So I'll say alternatives desperate. So if one is good as another, it means no standard reading. Or else we take the lowest common denominator of the various readings that have been made. That is, we frankly move from literary criticism into social psychology. So if you don't want to give every reading the same weight, what else can you do? Well, we can find one thing that all the readings have in common. And that's the the lowest common denominator. But that's not going to be very useful either, because like let's say for Wolverine or something, everyone can say Wolverine is in the X-Men. That's something that no one can really deny depending on the different readings. But it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help us because it doesn't tell us much about that reading itself if we just focus on the lowest common denominator. So that's not very good. And it even tells us that it goes into social psychology if you did that. So 3 times we have, the author telling us if you do this, you move away from literary criticism, at least the formalist type, into all these other subjects that are not literary criticism. So we want to just see what's different from literary criticism from all these other disciplines, I guess.
Right.
Um, to propose taking a consensus of the opinions of so-called qualified readers is simply to split the ideal reader into a group of ideal readers. Um, okay, that's some stuff. And if you don't understand it right away, it's fine. I'm just going to move forward. As consequences of the distinction just referred to, I guess the group, the qualified and unqualified, maybe. Um, the formalist critic rejects two popular tests for literary value. So rejects, and since it says it gives me a number again, two, I want to be aware of what's the first thing, what's the second thing. So the first, maybe I should also say rejects like popular tests for literary value. But yeah, the first proves the value of the work from the author's so-called sincerity or the intensity of the author's feelings as he or she composed it. Okay. We discount also such tests as the intensity of the critic's reaction. Okay, so it didn't give me like the second, like it didn't acknowledge if there's something that's like the second test. It could be that thing about discounting the tests. Well, it still doesn't really. Okay, let me see. So, two popular tests are rejected. The first, I think, could be test, or let's see, the value of the work from the author's sincerity. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna say the first proves the value of the work from the author's sincerity. We discount also such tests as the intensity. Okay, this is kind of weird, but since they say discount also, I'm going to say that the author's sincerity could be something that was discounted first, but it could easily be the other way around. We don't know yet, but we know that we do discount the critic's reaction, right? So here I would say paragraph 5, error to the above, no ideal reader, but better than alternatives, which are treat each reading equally, which means no standard reading, or lowest common denominator. I'm just going to write LCD, which moves into social psychology rather than lit crit. And Formalist Critic rejects, let's see, two tests. First, let's see. Okay, yeah. First is the okay, I think these are okay. I think the first is is one of the examples for a popular test for literary value. So the first let's say equates the lit value to author's sincerity, feelings during composition, and also reject critic's intensity or reaction. So no ideal reader, but better than alternatives. In parentheses, the alternatives are either treating each reading equally, which leads to the problem of no standard reading, or you take the lowest common denominator, which moves into social psych rather than lit crit. And then the formalist critic rejects two tests. The first, well, rejects two tests for literary value. Maybe I should have put that, but the first one states that literary value is essentially the author's sincerity or the feelings during composition, and then they say that they also reject the critic's reaction. But I don't know if that critic's reaction thing is a second thing, so I just put it the way that it is. All right, moving forward, a literary work is a document, and as a document can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it, or it may be manipulated as a force in its own right. Okay, so literary work can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it, or it could be manipulated as a force in its own right. Okay, like you can look into, or you can analyze the forces that made the literary work, or you can take the literary work as itself and use that or manipulate that as a force. Okay, it mirrors the past. It may influence the future. Okay, so this is like parallelism. So like the forces that have produced it, I believe, is the past, mirroring the past. And then if it's manipulated as a force in its own right, maybe that could be the future. These facts it would be futile to deny, and I know of no critic who does deny them. But another contrast word. But the reduction of a work of literature to its causes does not constitute literary criticism, nor does an estimate of its effects. Okay. So again, forces that produced it are equal to the past, are equal to causes, right? And then there's manipulating it itself, which is like the future, and which is like an estimate of its effects, right? Good literature is more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas. Even if we could agree upon a philosophical yardstick for measuring the truth of ideas, and even if we could find some way that transcended nose counting for determining the effectiveness of the rhetoric. Okay, some more stuff there that could be confusing. So let's see. For paragraph 6 here, we can say that the lit work forces that produced it slash past slash causes plus manipulated as force itself slash future slash effects. You see how I kind of like use parallelism to equate these?
Cool.
And let's see. Oh, but these are not lit crit. Lit or good lit is more than rhetoric applied to true ideas, even if we could agree on, you know, what's good or bad. That's like the yardstick thing. So yeah, I wrote literary work involves forces that produced it, which would mirror the past and is its causes. And the other thing manipulated as a force itself could be the future and could be the effects.
Mhm.
But all this stuff, you know, does not equal literary criticism. And then good literature is more than just rhetoric applied to true ideas, even if we can agree on what's good and bad. So now if we take this entire thing at once, paragraph 1, if you cut it from the author, it might seem bad. Paragraph 2, cut it from the reader, it might seem bad. 3, the formalist critic, though it might seem bad, doesn't want to focus on the author and doesn't want to focus on the reader. So far in paragraph 3, doesn't want to focus on the author, because if you focus too much on the author, you're no longer doing lit crit, you're doing biography or psychology, which involves the process of composition, but what the formalist critic focuses on is the structure. And then paragraph 4 continues that argument by referring to the focus on the reader, which would take you away from lit crit and towards psych and history of taste. And we talk about what the formalist critic does. It takes the author's intention at face value and uses an ideal reader rather than varying spectrum of readings. So these two paragraphs, I would say, are pretty similar here in that they are talking about a formalist critic not focusing on the author and not focusing on the reader, but focusing on the structure or the work itself. All right, and then paragraph 5, we acknowledge that there's no reader, but it's better than the alternatives. Um, and that the formalist critic rejects these popular tests for literary value. Um, an example, or the first one being that the belief that literary value is equal to the author's sincerity or the feelings during composition. So that's a popular test for literary value that the formalist critic rejects. And since they didn't mention anything after the rejecting the critic's reaction, I guess rejecting the critic's reaction would be the second thing. But okay, so those are the things that the formalist critic, rejects. And then the last paragraph, we are talking about like all these past forces, all these future forces that are not lit crit, and then this thing about good literature is more than just rhetoric applied to true ideas. So I think overall, it's predominantly like these 3 paragraphs in the middle. So what I would say for my main idea here is that formalist critic focuses on structure of work itself rather than author, I guess, authors, I'll just say like author slash reader.
Okay.
Maybe that would be okay. Focuses on structure of work itself rather than the author or the reader. The reason that I was kind of met on that is because, well, the formalist critic does take the author's intention as realized and does take the reader as an ideal reader, but those are the things that the formalist critic can do, but that's still different from focusing too much on the author or too much on the reader. So that's what I would come out with. What do you think?
I think so yeah, I kind of basically, so I have one on my end that I was doing, like, I guess before we did this.
You take a screenshot.
Let me take a screenshot of this. Yeah, so overall, I think we lined up pretty well. Um, I didn't get to P6, just because we were on at that moment, but I definitely, what was more confusing to me was, I guess, going into like P5, so towards the bottom end.
Mhm.
That's what really kind of threw me off. And I'm like, well, I already have you on here, might as well ask for, the way you would do it.
Mhm.
And when it comes to things like, I know this is not going to be the first kind of passage I'll read that'll be like this, and it's not the most entertaining one to read. So I definitely wanted to get your side on this, and then I guess moving forward through the questions on how we could answer these.
Yep, yep. So yeah, so you saw how, there was a lot of things that I was not sure of here. Mostly like in, paragraph 5, like, what's the other test for literary value, et cetera, et cetera. But you see how like I didn't like dwell too much on that.
Yeah,
Is sometimes people have trouble where if they don't understand something, they just reread it over and over again. I was just like, okay, whatever, let's just move forward. It'll either make sense as I continue to read, or they'll ask me a question about it and then I'll go back, or they won't ask you a question on it. So, uh, so yeah, you want to try not to reread as much, and also just kind of accept that certain things are going to be ambiguous and vague, and you just need to do the best that you can. So, because yeah, with paragraph 5, I also saw that. Um, you know, even with paragraph 4 with the ideal reader and stuff, that can be a little complicated. But um, but you could also see how the contrast words like kind of show you where the real important stuff are. Because if you take a look at them, right, we have the contrast word here, and it says formalist critic is concerned with the work itself, right?
Yeah.
And then, but this type of work is not the same as criticism of the work itself. Then here we're saying, okay, no ideal reader, but it's a good strategy. And then here we're saying that, like, reducing a work of literature to its causes or its effects is not literary criticism. So those contrast words are going to clue you in most of the time on what's really important.
Right.
Yep.
Sweet, sweet. Okay. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have less highlighting in my, and I'm gonna eventually get to that kind of highlighting and be able to continue through these passages.
Yep.
And I guess timing will just be me consistently reading and getting faster at that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Because once we get to phase two, where you're going to be taking practice tests, that's when timing is going to be more of a thing. Um, but yeah, did you end up? So I know you said like your map was similar. Um, what did you end up getting as a main idea?
So, main idea, I hadn't read the sixth paragraph, so I was thinking about it as we were going along.
What
Um,
did you say about the sixth paragraph?
So I hadn't gotten to the sixth paragraph. So when as you were reading it, I was also going about it. I'm like, okay, I know he's gonna highlight what he needs to, but what is the main idea of it? And from the points that I got, at least, so like this has to do with how literature is critiqued, and there's things that you have to take away from it so you can critique it. So I just put like the FC for the formal critic. Formal critic has to take away has to remove author, reader, um to be able to, I guess, I don't want to use the word critique within this, but in the sense he has to remove these two things to be able to do his job and not have it and not put his own opinion into it.
So 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 it seems like you were able to get what the formalist critic is not. But what is the formalist critic? Like, because we know it's not someone who's going to focus too much on the author, and it's not someone who's going to focus too much on the reader. But what would they focus on most?
Someone who would focus on like, well, you said structure, like I placed on mine as like see, where is it? Oh yeah, on P4, I wrote down critic has two assumptions. They find the intent of the author and then they find the main idea.
Oh wait, what? Wait, what did you say about the main idea?
Well, like they for like the second one over here, and two, the formalist critic assumes ideal reader. So this sentence here, I placed like his he has two assumptions. One is to find the intent of the author, and then the second one is to find some form of main idea to like kind of reference to.
Well, when you say main idea, um, so they're telling us here that the so the first part is the author's intention, like as realized, which could be a little confusing from the author's actual intention. So that's why I wrote at face value, right?
Okay.
Um, uh, but the second thing is the ideal reader. And
Right.
you kind of want to see that you have what's kind of repeated throughout the passage is what happens when you separate the work from the author, and then what happens when you separate the work from the reader.
Right.
Right? We saw that in paragraph 1 and 2, and since then, that's what we've been doing, right? So like here, So cutting it from the author, cutting it from the reader, and then P3 says if you focus too much on the author, you go into these other disciplines, right? So that's in favor of paragraph one's argument of cutting it from the author, right? And
Right.
when I was at this point, I was expecting them to then address the argument about the reader, and that's exactly what they did. So focus on the reader will take you away into these into these other disciplines. So that's addressing cutting it from the reader, right? And so the two assumptions, right? The first one is addressing cutting it from the author by saying that the relevant part of the author's intention is what's actually put into the work, not like some special, thing behind it, right? Um, like uh, you know, I'm trying to think of like, have you ever seen like, okay, well, um, okay, so I so like I can't for some reason I'm only thinking of like Wolverine, but that doesn't work as an example. But like I'm trying to just show or compare author's intention versus author's intention as realized. So
Okay.
um so author's intention, like, okay, let's just say that for argument's sake, because I can't think of like um a good or I could think of it. All right, I found an example. Magneto. Okay, so Magneto, we can see in, let's say, the movies or whatever, as a villain because he does villainous things. But we can also see him as a Holocaust survivor who wants to protect his people, mutants, from any type of that type of genocide. So the author, if you just watch a movie or of X-Men or a TV show or something like that, and you watch like an episode or one movie, you're gonna clearly see, okay, Magneto is a bad guy because he's hurting people and he's planning these things. And that's the author's intention as realized. But what
Mhm.
if the author or filmmaker in this case, like, really wanted you to sympathize with Magneto, right? If the author, the intention as realized is the one that you see at face value, which is that Magneto's a bad guy. But the author could have an intention to make him a good guy or like an anti-hero. But the formalist critic would only focus on what's at face value.
Right. I think there's this movie called Wreck-It Ralph, and there's a
Yeah,
scene where they're a circle of bad guys sitting together, and one of them says, "Just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you're a bad guy."
I don't get it. What does that mean?
Okay, so if there was like a circle of villains sitting around, right, and they're like just talking, and there's like one of them's like, "Okay, just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you're a bad guy. Like, just because people view you as the villain doesn't mean you really are the villain. It just might just look that way."
Yeah, I see. I see. Yep, yep. Yeah, so it's like, you know, the author's intention as realized, like the best way I can put that is at face value.
Right.
So that's one of the assumptions made by the formalist critic, and it addresses the author. And then the next one, we would expect to address the reader. And that's what we do see. We see that the second thing assumes an ideal reader instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings and a central point of reference. So that's what that's talking about. It's addressing the reader. And then they elaborate on that ideal reader in the next paragraph.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
Sweet. Sweet. Okay. I think we're close to the hour, are we not?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 723. So let's try well, you may remember the question answers, or
Oh,
yeah. Like
I was gonna say, how about I attempt these
yep.
on my own, and then I will email you,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and then we can. Well, I'll email you any of them that I have trouble with,
Yep.
and then for the next one, I'll go ahead and think about what we'll go over for the next one.
Sure. So yeah, so I would say to take the screenshot that you have, do it side by side with your map. I think that one of the things that's different is this part.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
about something about like main idea, I think. Um, but yeah, and be aware of things like parallelism. Like that's kind of like what we see here. Like and yeah, just like boiling it down to like, the simplest like things, which is like, okay, author, reader, and connecting the, if those things are important or not. So
Right.
all right, awesome. So good luck on these. And when do you want to meet next?
Yeah, let's see. Um, Let me see. I am. That's April. We're on the 10th. Let's aim for next week on. Is the 19th okay with you? It's a Sunday.
Um let let me see one sec. Okay, so on the 19th, let's see. I have okay, do you want to do 5? Are you able to do 5 p.m. Eastern on Sunday the 19th?
Yeah, I can do 5 p.m.
Okay. All right, so so I put you in for Sunday the 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And yeah, good luck with these. Email me if anything. And oh yeah, and then I sent you a clip from Spider-Man with the tritium.
Yeah, I saw it.
That's where I first learned it. There's so many things like this that I first learned from, like superhero like movies and comic books and things like that. Um, yeah.
So, so Shane, do you do this full time? Like, is this like your full time job is doing the tutoring or?
So